The paddle slipped from Wendy Sutton's hand as the auctioneer's gavel came down with a sharp crack, and she realized with dawning horror that everyone in the glittering ballroom was staring directly at her. Sold to the young lady in the blue dress for $15,000. The auctioneer announced cheerfully, his voice booming through the microphone. Wendy's stomach dropped. Her best friend Lisa grabbed her arm, eyes wide. "Did you just accidentally bid $15,000 on a date with Preston Ortega?" "I was scratching my nose," Wendy whispered frantically, watching as a tall figure stood from a table near the front. Even from across the room, she could see the perfectly tailored suit, the confident posture, the dark hair that probably cost more to maintain than her monthly rent. "Lisa, I don't have $15,000. I'm a wildlife photographer. I eat ramen 3 times a week." "Everyone knows who Preston Ortega is," Lisa hissed back. "He owns half the commercial real estate in the city. He's on the cover of Forbes like every other month. And you just want a dinner date with him." Wendy felt heat creeping up her neck as an event coordinator in a sharp pencil skirt approached with a clipboard and a smile that suggested she dealt with panicked auction winners regularly. "Congratulations. If you could just follow me to settle the payment arrangements." "There's been a mistake," Wendy started, but Lisa jabbed her in the ribs. "You raised your paddle," Lisa said under her breath. "Everyone saw it. This is a charity auction for the Wildlife Conservation Fund. You know, the organization you literally work for. You cannot back out now." Wendy's mind raced. She'd come tonight only because her boss had insisted all staff attend the annual fundraiser. She'd borrowed this dress from her sister, put on makeup for the first time in months, and planned to eat the free appetizers and leave early. The bachelor auction had seemed ridiculous, watching wealthy women compete over dinner dates with eligible millionaires. When her college roommate texted her a joke right as the auctioneer pointed in her general direction, she'd lifted her paddle to scratch her nose while reading the message. Now she was apparently going on a date with one of the richest men in the city. "Miss Sutton." The coordinator's smile remained professionally pleasant. "This way, please." Wendy followed on unsteady heels, Lisa trailing behind for moral support. They were led to a quiet corner where a payment station had been set up. The coordinator tapped efficiently on a tablet. "Will you be paying by card or check?" "I need to speak with someone about this," Wendy said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I didn't actually mean to bid. It was an accident." The coordinator's expression shifted to something more sympathetic but no less firm. "I understand, but unfortunately all bids are considered binding. The proceeds go directly to wildlife conservation efforts. However, we do offer payment plans if needed." "A payment plan for a date," Wendy muttered. This was absurd. This was absolutely absurd, if I may interrupt. The voice was deep, smooth, and came from directly behind her. Wendy turned and found herself looking up at Preston Ortega. He was somehow more imposing up close, with sharp cheekbones and dark eyes that seemed to take in everything about her in a single sweep. He wore his expensive suit like armor, and there was something in his expression she couldn't quite read. "I couldn't help but overhear," he said, his gaze fixed on Wendy. "It seems there's been some confusion about the bid." Relief flooded through her. He was going to help her out of this. "Yes, exactly. I was just scratching my nose, and which is why I'd like to cover the cost of the bid myself," Preston continued smoothly. "And still take Miss Sutton to dinner, if she's willing." Wendy's mouth fell open slightly. That was not what she'd expected him to say. Preston pulled a checkbook from his inner jacket pocket, which seemed impossibly old-fashioned and somehow fitting for someone of his obvious wealth. He wrote out a check with swift, confident strokes and handed it to the coordinator. "For the Wildlife Conservation Fund." "I believe this settles the matter." The coordinator accepted the check with wide eyes. "That's very generous, Mr. Ortega, thank you." "So," Preston said, turning back to Wendy. His expression had softened just slightly, though his eyes remained unreadable. "Would you have dinner with me?" "No financial obligation. Just dinner." Wendy was acutely aware of Lisa practically vibrating with excitement beside her, and the coordinator watching with obvious interest. Around them, the auction continued, but she felt like they were in a bubble separate from the rest of the glittering event. The smart thing would be to politely decline and disappear into the crowd. She didn't belong in this world of charity auctions and billionaires. She spent her days in the field, photographing endangered species, wearing cargo pants and no makeup. She had student loans and a tiny apartment and a car that made concerning noises, but something in the way he was looking at her, patient and almost curious, made her hesitate. "Why?" she asked instead. "You could have just let me back out." "I could have," Preston agreed. "But then I wouldn't get to have dinner with you. You don't even know me." "No," he said, "but I'd like to." Lisa elbowed her again, harder this time. Wendy shot her friend a look but then turned back to Preston. He was waiting, perfectly still, like he had all the time in the world for her answer. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Dinner." The corner of his mouth lifted just barely. "Friday evening. I'll have my assistant contact you for details." Then he was gone, moving back through the crowd with the easy confidence of someone who belonged everywhere. The coordinator was beaming. Lisa was grabbing her arm and squealing, and Wendy was trying to process what had just happened. "You have a date with Preston Ortega," Lisa said, shaking her shoulder. "Do you understand? Preston Ortega, the Preston Ortega." "I don't understand anything right now," Wendy admitted. She felt dizzy. "Lisa, why would he want to have dinner with me? He paid $15,000 for this." "Because he wants to have dinner with you," Lisa said, like it was obvious. "Wendy, he looked at you like you were the only person in this entire ballroom. That's ridiculous." "That's what I saw." Wendy glanced across the room to where Preston had returned to his table. He was speaking with an older gentleman, looking perfectly composed, like he hadn't just thrown $15,000 at a charity to have dinner with a complete stranger who'd accidentally bid on him. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Wendy tried to focus on the auction, on the speeches about conservation efforts and endangered species, but her mind kept drifting back to dark eyes and the question of what she was getting herself into. The call came Tuesday morning while Wendy was in her tiny office at the Wildlife Conservation Fund headquarters, reviewing photographs from her last assignment. She'd spent 3 weeks in Montana documenting wolf populations, and her favorite shot showed a gray wolf standing on a ridge at sunset, perfectly silhouetted against the orange sky. "Miss Sutton." The voice on the phone was female, professional, and brisk. "This is Catherine, Mr. Ortega's executive assistant. I'm calling to arrange dinner for Friday evening." Wendy set down her coffee. "Right, the dinner. Mr. Ortega has made reservations at Luminaire for 7:30. He'll send a car to collect you at 7. What's your address, Luminaire?" Wendy had heard of it. It was the kind of restaurant that required reservations months in advance and probably charged $50 for a salad. She gave her address and tried not to think about what she was going to wear. "Excellent," Catherine said. "The car will arrive promptly at 7. "Is there anything else you need?" "Just one question," Wendy said. "Why is he doing this?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'm sorry." "Why does Preston Ortega want to have dinner with me? He doesn't know me. He paid $15,000 for this. It doesn't make sense." Another pause, longer this time. "Miss Sutton, I've worked for Mr. Ortega for 8 years. When he makes a decision, he has his reasons. I suggest you ask him yourself on Friday." After Catherine hung up, Wendy sat staring at her computer screen at the wolf on the ridge and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. The rest of the week crawled by. Wendy tried to focus on work, on editing photos and planning her next assignment, but her mind kept drifting to Friday. Lisa dragged her shopping on Wednesday, insisting she needed something better than the borrowed dress she'd worn to the auction. "You're going to Luminaire," Lisa said, rifling through racks at a boutique that made Wendy's credit card weep. "You need to look like you belong there." "I'll never belong there," Wendy said, but she let Lisa talk her into a simple black dress that somehow made her look elegant and sophisticated. It cost more than she wanted to think about. Friday arrived too quickly. Wendy spent an hour getting ready, which was approximately 55 minutes longer than she usually spent on her appearance. She straightened her long brown hair, applied makeup with a careful hand, and slipped into the black dress. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The car arrived precisely at 7. It was sleek and black with a professional driver who held the door open and called her Miss Sutton. Wendy had never felt more out of place in her life. Luminaire occupied the top floor of one of the most expensive buildings downtown. The elevator ride-up seemed to last forever. When the doors opened, Wendy stepped into a world of soft lighting, quiet music, and the kind of understated elegance that screamed money. The host greeted her by name. "Miss Sutton, Mr. Ortega is waiting for you. This way, please." She followed through the restaurant, past tables full of well-dressed diners, to a corner table by the windows. The view overlooked the city, lights spreading out in all directions like a carpet of stars. Preston stood when he saw her. He wore a dark suit, different from the one at the auction but equally perfect. "Wendy, thank you for coming. Thank you for paying $15,000 so I could," she said, then immediately regretted it. That wasn't the right thing to say. But Preston's mouth quirked up in what might have been amusement. It was for a good cause. He held out her chair, and Wendy sat, feeling the weight of his attention as he settled across from her. A waiter appeared immediately with menus and water, rattling off specials she could barely process. When they were alone again, Preston leaned back slightly, studying her. "You're nervous, wouldn't you be?" Wendy asked. "This isn't exactly my usual Friday night." "What's your usual Friday night?" "Editing photos in my pajamas while eating takeout and watching nature documentaries." His expression shifted, something that might have been genuine interest. "You're a photographer. Wildlife photographer specifically. I work for the Conservation Fund." She paused. "You could have looked me up, before tonight." "I could have," Preston agreed. "I chose not to." "Why not?" "Because I wanted to meet you without preconceptions. I wanted to hear about you from you." Wendy studied him across the table. In the soft lighting, his features seemed less intimidating, more human. There was something guarded in his expression, like he was so used to wearing a mask that he'd forgotten how to take it off. "Your turn," she said. "Why did you really do this? You could have let me back out at the auction. You didn't have to pay all that money." Preston was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing the stem of his water glass. "Do you know what it's like to have everyone around you want something from you?" The question caught her off guard. "No. Every conversation is a transaction," he said. "Every dinner invitation has an agenda. Every smile wants something in return. It becomes exhausting, never knowing if people are interested in you or just what you can do for them." He met her eyes. "But you didn't want to bid on me. You accidentally raised your paddle while scratching your nose. That's what made me interesting." Wendy asked. "That I didn't want to go out with you. That you were genuine," Preston corrected. "That you were horrified when you realized what had happened. That you didn't see dollar signs when you looked at me. Just a person you'd accidentally gotten tangled up with." Wendy considered this. It made a strange kind of sense. "So this is your rebellion, Going on a date with someone who doesn't care about your money. This is me being curious, he said. About the woman who photographs wolves and eats ramen 3 times a week and looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole at the auction. You heard that part. I hear most things. The waiter returned to take their orders. Wendy chose something at random, barely processing what she was agreeing to. When they were alone again, she realized Preston was still watching her with that quiet intensity. Tell me about your work, he said. The photography. So she did. Once she started talking about the animals, the words came easier. She told him about the wolves in Montana, about spending hours in freezing temperatures waiting for the perfect shot. She talked about the thrill of capturing something wild and beautiful, of using her photographs to make people care about conservation. Preston listened like every word mattered. He asked questions that showed he was actually paying attention, not just being polite. Somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, Wendy forgot to be nervous. She forgot about the expensive restaurant and the city lights and the fact that she was having dinner with a billionaire. She just talked to Preston, and he talked back. He told her about growing up with a father who'd built an empire and expected his son to expand it. About learning to read contracts before he could properly read books. About the pressure of expectations and the loneliness of success. People think money solves every problem, he said, cutting into his steak with precise movements. It solves some, but it creates others. Like never knowing if people actually like you, Wendy guessed. Exactly like that. Dessert arrived, some elaborate confection that probably had a French name Wendy couldn't pronounce. She took a bite and nearly groaned at how good it was. This is incredible, she said. I'm used to grocery store cookies. Preston smiled, a real smile this time, and it transformed his entire face. I think you might be the most refreshing person I've met in years. Because I eat grocery store cookies. Because you're honest about it. They talked until the restaurant began to empty, until the waiter had refilled their coffee cups 3 times and was starting to look tired. Finally, Preston glanced at his watch. I should get you home, he said. It's late. Wendy felt a strange disappointment. The evening had passed in what felt like minutes. She wasn't ready for it to end. The car was waiting downstairs. Preston rode with her this time, sitting close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and woodsy. The city passed by outside the windows, bright and alive. When they pulled up outside her apartment building, which looked considerably shabbier next to the luxury car, Preston walked her to the door. Thank you for tonight, he said. I enjoyed it. Me too, Wendy admitted. More than I expected to. He stood there for a moment, hands in his pockets, looking at her in a way that made her heart beat faster. Would you have dinner with me again, without the auction or the charity obligation, just because you want to? Wendy knew she should probably say no. This was complicated. He was a billionaire, and she was a photographer with student loans. They came from completely different worlds. Nothing about this made practical sense. Yes, she said anyway. His smile was worth it. I'll call you. Wendy watched the car pull away before heading inside. Her phone buzzed immediately with a text from Lisa demanding details. But Wendy just stood in her tiny apartment, looking at her camera equipment and her thrift store furniture, and wondered what she was getting herself into. Preston called the next day. Not Catherine, his assistant. Him personally on her cell phone while she was grocery shopping. Are you free Wednesday evening? He asked after they'd exchanged greetings. Wendy nearly dropped a can of soup. Yes. Would you like to go somewhere with me? Not dinner. Something different. What kind of something? It's a surprise. Wear comfortable clothes. She spent the next 4 days wildly curious and slightly anxious. Lisa had theories, each more elaborate than the last. Maybe he's taking you on his private jet somewhere. Maybe he owns a yacht. Maybe he has box seats at something fancy. Wednesday evening, the same black car picked her up. Wendy had agonized over what comfortable clothes meant and finally settled on jeans and a nice sweater. When Preston emerged from the car to greet her, he was wearing jeans too and a dark Henley that made him look younger and somehow more approachable. "You look nice," he said. "You look human," she replied, then immediately flushed. "I mean, not like you didn't look human before, just more casual." "Normal casual. I'm going to stop talking now." Preston laughed, a genuine sound that made something in her chest warm. "I know what you meant. Come on." They drove out of the city, into the suburbs, and then beyond. Wendy watched the buildings give way to trees, confusion growing. "Are you kidnapping me?" she asked. "Because Lisa knows I'm with you. She'll tell the police." "Not kidnapping," Preston assured her. "Just trust me." Finally, they pulled up to what looked like a nature center. It was closed for the evening, but Preston led her to a side entrance where a woman in a ranger uniform was waiting. "Mr. Ortega," the woman greeted them. "Everything's ready for you." "Thank you, Susan." Wendy followed Preston inside, through empty halls filled with nature exhibits, until they emerged into an outdoor area. Her breath caught. It was a wildlife rehabilitation center. Enclosures spread out across the grounds, and she could see shapes moving in some of them. Birds, she thought. And maybe something larger. "What is this?" she asked. "I did some research after our dinner," Preston admitted. "You mentioned wanting to photograph gray wolves but said most of your wolf work was from a distance. The center here has a wolf pack they are rehabilitating. They're not usually open for private visits, but I made some calls." Wendy stared at him. "You arranged for me to photograph wolves. If you want to. Susan said she can get you fairly close as long as we follow safety protocols." She didn't know what to say. No one had ever done something like this for her. Lisa's theories about jets and yachts seemed ridiculous now. This was so much better. Susan led them through the center, explaining the rehabilitation work they did. The wolf enclosure was massive, designed to mimic natural habitat. 3 wolves lounged near a rocky outcropping, and even in the fading evening light, they were magnificent. "I'll need to stay with you," Susan said. "But you can set up over there. They're used to some human presence." Wendy pulled her camera from her bag with shaking hands. Preston stood back, giving her space to work, and she lost herself in what she loved. The wolves were beautiful, powerful creatures. She captured them moving, playing, resting. The light was perfect, golden hour painting everything in warm tones. She was lining up a shot when she realized one of the wolves was staring directly at her camera, yellow eyes intelligent and curious. She pressed the shutter, heart pounding, knowing she just captured something special. When the light finally faded too much for photography, Wendy lowered her camera and found Preston watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That was amazing." "You're amazing," he replied. "Watching you work, you transform." They had dinner at a small diner on the drive back, nothing like the elegance of Luminaire. Preston ate a burger like a normal person and asked to see the photos she'd taken. Wendy pulled them up on her camera's screen, watching his face as he scrolled through. "These are incredible," he said. "You have real talent." "It's not about talent," Wendy said. "It's about patience and timing and loving what you do, and you love it, more than anything." Preston looked at her across the table, and there was something intense in his gaze. "I envy that, loving something so purely." "You don't love what you do." "I'm good at it," he said carefully. "I was raised to be good at it, but love," he shook his head. "That's different." Wendy thought about the pressure he'd mentioned, the expectations. What would you do if you could do anything? Preston was quiet for a long moment. I don't know if anyone's ever asked me that before. I'm asking now. He smiled, but there was something sad in it. I think I'd like to build things, not buy buildings or acquire companies. Actually build something with my hands. Create something that didn't exist before. He paused. That sounds stupid. That sounds wonderful, Wendy said. Why don't you? Because I'm Preston Ortega. I have responsibilities, expectations, a legacy to maintain. But what do you want? He met her eyes. Right now. I want to keep sitting in this diner with you, eating mediocre fries and talking about things that matter. Wendy's heart did something complicated in her chest. This man, this billionaire who could have anything, wanted to sit in a cheap diner with her. It didn't make sense, but somehow it also made perfect sense. Then let's stay, she said. So they did. They talked until the waitress started giving them pointed looks, and even then Preston left a tip that probably made up for them taking up the table. On the drive back to her apartment, Wendy found herself leaning against his shoulder, comfortable in a way that should have felt strange but didn't. "Can I see you this weekend?" Preston asked when they arrived. "I have an assignment," Wendy said regretfully. "I'm photographing a bird sanctuary about 2 hours north. I'll be gone Saturday and Sunday." "Monday then," she smiled. "Monday." He walked her to her door again. This time when he said goodnight, his hand brushed against hers just for a moment. It sent electricity up her arm. Wendy spent the weekend thinking about him while photographing rare shorebirds. Lisa called demanding updates and screamed when Wendy told her about the Wolf Center. "He arranged a private wildlife photography session for you." Lisa practically shrieked through the phone. "Wendy, that's the most romantic thing I've ever heard. This man is falling for you." "Don't be ridiculous," Wendy said, but her stomach fluttered. "We've only seen each other twice, 3 times if you count the auction." "That doesn't count." "It counts," Lisa insisted. "And I'm telling you, he's falling for you. The question is, are you falling for him?" Wendy didn't answer, but she thought about it. She thought about Preston's smile and his honesty and the way he looked at her like she mattered. She thought about how he'd arranged something thoughtful instead of just throwing money at an expensive date. She thought about his sadness when he talked about his life and his curiosity when he asked about hers. Maybe she was falling. Maybe she'd already fallen. Monday night, Preston took her to an art gallery opening. Wendy felt out of place among the elegantly dressed crowd, but Preston kept his hand on the small of her back, grounding her. They looked at abstract paintings and drank champagne, and Wendy tried to understand what she was supposed to see in the art. "I don't get it," she admitted, staring at a canvas that was just blue paint with some black lines. "What's this supposed to be?" "Whatever you want it to be," Preston said. "That's the point of abstract art." "That's a cop-out answer," he laughed. "You're not wrong. Honestly, I don't always get it either, but it's expected that I attend these things." "Must be exhausting," Wendy said. "Living up to expectations all the time." "It is." He looked at her. "That's why being with you is so refreshing. You don't expect anything except honesty." They left the gallery early and walked through the city instead. It was late October, the air crisp and cool. Preston bought roasted chestnuts from a street vendor, and they ate them while walking through a park, talking about everything and nothing. "Tell me something no one else knows about you," Wendy said. Preston thought about it. "I collect old maps, antique ones, from before modern cartography. There's something fascinating about how people understood the world when so much of it was still unknown." "That's actually really cool." "Your turn. Something no one else knows," Wendy considered. "I'm afraid of domestic dogs, big ones especially. I can photograph wolves and bears without blinking, but a German shepherd makes me nervous." "Why?" "I was bitten when I was 8. I know it's irrational, but I can't help it." Preston reached over and took her hand. It was the first time they'd actually held hands, and it felt significant. His palm was warm against hers. "Not irrational," he said. "Just human." They walked like that for a while, hands linked, comfortable in the silence. When Preston finally drove her home, he walked her up to her apartment this time, instead of just to the building entrance. At her door, they stood close together. Wendy could feel the heat of him, smell his cologne. Her heart was racing. "I want to kiss you," Preston said quietly, "but I want to make sure that's okay." "That's okay," Wendy whispered. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she didn't want to. When his lips met hers, it was gentle at first, almost tentative. Then his hand came up to cup her face, and the kiss deepened, and Wendy felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he said, but he didn't move. "Probably," Wendy agreed, but she didn't step back. They stood there for another moment before Preston finally, reluctantly, pulled away. "I'll call you tomorrow. You better." She watched him walk down the hallway, and he turned back twice to look at her before disappearing into the elevator. Wendy went inside and immediately called Lisa. "He kissed me," she said as soon as Lisa answered. "Finally, tell me everything." Wendy told her, reliving every moment. When she finally hung up and got ready for bed, she touched her lips and smiled. She was definitely falling. The next few weeks passed in a blur of dates and phone calls and text messages. Preston seemed to be making room in his undoubtedly busy schedule specifically for her. They had dinner at quiet restaurants and loud bars. They went to a hockey game where Preston explained the rules and Wendy ate too much stadium food. They spent a Sunday afternoon at a bookstore, browsing separately and then showing each other their finds. Wendy met Preston's world gradually. His assistant Catherine, who turned out to be sharp-witted and protective. His business partner Marcus, who raised an eyebrow at Wendy but seemed to approve. The driver, James, who always had a kind word and a smile. Preston met her friends too. Lisa, who cornered him at a group dinner and gave him what she later called the best friend interrogation. Wendy's co-workers at the Conservation Fund, who were starstruck at first but relaxed when Preston asked genuine questions about their work. "He's good for you," Lisa said one night when they were having drinks, just the two of them. "I haven't seen you this happy in years." "I am happy," Wendy admitted, "but it's also terrifying. What if it doesn't last? What if his world and my world are too different? What if they're not?" Lisa countered. "What if you're exactly what he needs and he's exactly what you need? Stop borrowing trouble." But the trouble found them anyway. It started with a photograph. Wendy and Preston had been at a restaurant, nothing fancy, just a quiet dinner. But someone had taken a picture of them, Preston's arm around her waist, her laughing at something he'd said. The photo ended up online on some gossip site, with speculation about who the mystery woman was. By morning, it had spread. Wendy woke up to texts from Lisa and missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. When she finally checked social media, she found her accounts flooded with messages. Some were curious, some were cruel. People calling her a gold digger, saying she was after his money, that someone like her could never belong with someone like him. She called Preston, trying to keep her voice steady. "Have you seen the photos?" "I've seen them." His voice was tight. "I'm sorry, Wendy. I should have warned you this might happen. People are saying terrible things. I know, ignore them. They don't know you, they don't know us." But ignoring them was harder than it sounded. Wendy went to work and felt people staring. Someone from HR actually pulled her aside to make sure she was okay, which was humiliating. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications. That evening, Preston showed up at her apartment unannounced. He looked exhausted, tie loosened and hair slightly mussed like he'd been running his hands through it. "Are you okay?" he asked as soon as she opened the door. "I don't know," Wendy said honestly. "This is a lot." He came inside, pacing her small living room like a caged animal. "I can fix this. I'll have my PR team release a statement. I'll make this go away, can you?" Wendy asked. "Make it go away? Or will there just be more photos, more speculation, more people picking apart everything about me?" Preston stopped pacing and looked at her. "Is that what you're worried about? The attention?" "I'm worried about living in a fishbowl," Wendy said. "I'm worried about strangers thinking they have a right to judge my life. I'm worried that this is always going to be what it's like dating you." "It won't always be this intense," Preston said, but he didn't sound entirely convinced. "Eventually they'll lose interest, move on to someone else. But it will never completely go away, will it? You're Preston Ortega. You're always going to be in the public eye." He ran a hand through his hair. "What are you saying?" Wendy's throat felt tight. "I'm saying I don't know if I can do this, live like this." The silence that fell between them was heavy. Preston's expression shuddered, closing off. "I see." "Preston, no, I understand. This is my life and it's not what you signed up for. I get it." He moved toward the door. "I should go." "Wait," Wendy said, but she didn't know what else to say. She was overwhelmed and scared and the words wouldn't come. Preston paused at the door, looking back at her. For a moment, she saw past his mask to the hurt underneath. "For what it's worth, I think you're brave enough to handle anything, but I won't force you into a life you don't want. If this is too much, then maybe it's better to end it now before we're in any deeper." Then he was gone, and Wendy was standing in her apartment, shaking. She sank onto her couch and pulled out her phone, scrolling through the comments and articles. Most of them were garbage, speculation, and meanness. But one article was different. It was from a business magazine, and it featured a photo of Preston at some corporate event. The article talked about his success, his empire, his reputation. But there was a quote that caught Wendy's attention. "Preston Ortega has everything," a business rival was quoted saying. "Money, power, success. But I've never seen him look truly happy. It's like he's built this perfect life that's completely hollow." Wendy stared at the words. She thought about Preston's sadness when he talked about expectations, his envy when she discussed loving her work, the way he lit up when they were together, like he was finally allowed to be himself. She thought about walking away, protecting herself from the scrutiny and the judgment. It would be easier, safer. But she also thought about never hearing his laugh again. Never having him look at her with that intensity that made her feel like the only person in the world. Never kissing him, or holding his hand, or discovering new things about him. The question wasn't whether she could handle his life. The question was whether a life without him was worth the peace and quiet. Wendy picked up her phone and called him. He answered on the first ring. "Wendy." "I'm sorry," she said. "I panicked. This whole day has been overwhelming and I let it get to me." "You don't have to apologize, let me finish," she interrupted. "I was scared. I am scared. But I've been thinking about it and I realized something. Being with you these past weeks, I've been happier than I've been in a long time, maybe ever. And yes, your life comes with complications. But walking away because I'm scared of what other people think, that's not who I want to be." Preston was quiet for a moment. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm not giving up on this, on us, if you're not." "I'm not," he said immediately. "Wendy, I'm falling in love with you. I have been for weeks. I don't want to lose you." Her breath caught. "You're falling in love with me." "Yes, is that okay?" Wendy laughed, slightly teary. "That's more than okay, because I'm falling in love with you too." "Can I come back?" Preston asked. "I'm sitting in my car outside your building like an idiot." "Yes," she said. "Come back." 2 minutes later, there was a knock on her door. Wendy opened it to find Preston standing there, and before either of them could say anything, she pulled him inside and kissed him. He responded immediately, wrapping his arms around her, holding her close like he was afraid she might disappear. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Preston cupped her face in his hands. "We'll figure this out, together, I promise." "Together," Wendy agreed. They spent the rest of the evening on her couch, talking through everything. Preston explained how the media attention worked, what to expect, how to handle it. He gave her the number for his security team in case anyone bothered her. He promised to be there whenever she needed him. "I have a question," Wendy said eventually. "Why me? You could have anyone, someone from your world, someone used to all this. Why choose someone like me and make everything more complicated?" Preston was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing patterns on her hand. "Because everyone from my world wants Preston Ortega the billionaire. The name and the money and what I can do for them. But you wanted to back out of the auction. You were horrified at the idea of dinner with me. And when you finally agreed, you didn't care about any of that. You just saw me." "Just Preston. Do you know how rare that is?" Wendy leaned her head against his shoulder. "I do see you, the real you, and I like what I see. Even though I come with paparazzi and gossip sites and people who will judge you, even though," she confirmed, "we'll handle it together." Over the next few weeks, they settled into a rhythm. The media attention didn't disappear, but it quieted down as other stories captured the public's attention. Wendy learned to ignore most of it, to focus on what mattered. Preston's PR team released a brief statement confirming he was in a relationship but requesting privacy. It helped, somewhat. There were still photographers sometimes, still gossip, but it became background noise rather than a crisis. What mattered was them. Preston took her to his apartment for the first time, a massive penthouse that should have been intimidating but somehow felt empty. "It's never felt like home," he admitted. "Just a place to sleep." "You need some life in here," Wendy said, looking around at the expensive furniture and bare walls. "Photos, plants, something personal." "Like what?" "Like this," she said, pulling out her phone. She found one of her favorite photos from Montana, the wolf on the ridge at sunset. "If you want it, I could get this printed for you." Preston looked at the image, then at her. "I'd love that." She also met his father, which was significantly more intimidating than the penthouse. Richard Ortega was exactly what Wendy had imagined, imposing and shrewd and openly skeptical of her. "My son tells me you're a photographer," Richard said over dinner at his estate. "Wildlife photographer, yes, sir." "And you work for the Wildlife Conservation Fund." "I do." Richard studied her with sharp eyes. "That's quite a different world from Preston's business." "It is," Wendy agreed, refusing to be intimidated. "But I think that's part of why we work. We balance each other." Something shifted in Richard's expression just slightly. "Balance. That's not something Preston has had much of." Later, when they were leaving, Richard pulled Preston aside. Wendy pretended not to listen but heard him say, "She's got backbone, I like her." Preston drove them back to the city with a small smile. "He doesn't like many people." "Should I be honored or terrified?" "Both, probably." Thanksgiving came, and Wendy invited Preston to her family's celebration. Her parents lived in the suburbs, in the house where she'd grown up. Her sister Amy would be there with her husband and 2 kids. It was going to be chaotic and loud and nothing like Preston's world. "Are you sure about this?" Wendy asked on the drive over. "My family can be a lot." "I want to meet them," Preston assured her. "They're important to you, so they're important to me." Her mother opened the door with a huge smile. "You must be Preston. Come in, come in. Wendy's told us so much about you." Her father was more reserved, shaking Preston's hand with a firm grip and a measuring look. Amy immediately demanded to see photos of them together. The kids, 7 and 5, were suspicious of the stranger until Preston asked them about their favorite video games and somehow knew everything about characters Wendy had never heard of. "How do you know about that?" she asked later while they were setting the table. I may have done some research on what 7-year-old boys like, Preston admitted. I wanted to make a good impression. Wendy kissed his cheek. You're doing great. Dinner was exactly as chaotic as she'd predicted. Everyone talked over each other, and the kids spilled things, and her mother kept piling more food on Preston's plate. But Preston looked more relaxed than Wendy had ever seen him, laughing at her father's jokes and listening to Amy's stories about her kids. After dinner, her father pulled Preston aside while Wendy helped clean up. She watched through the kitchen window as they talked in the backyard, and her stomach clenched with nerves. Dad likes him, Amy said, coming up beside her. I can tell. How can you tell? He's doing the serious face, but his shoulders aren't tense. He only gets tense when he doesn't like someone. When Preston and her father came back inside, both looking satisfied, Wendy relaxed. Later, on the drive back to the city, Preston reached over and took her hand. Thank you for today, he said. Your family is wonderful. They can be overwhelming. They're real, Preston said, and they clearly love you. Your dad gave me the protective father talk, by the way. Wendy groaned. I'm sorry. Don't be. I respect him for it. He said if I ever hurt you, he knows how to make a body disappear. He did not say that, Preston grinned. He might have. The point is, he loves you and wants you to be happy. I told him that's what I want too. As winter settled in, their relationship deepened. Wendy spent more time at Preston's apartment, slowly making it feel more lived in. She brought plants and photos and throw pillows that actually looked comfortable. Preston started keeping her favorite snacks in his kitchen and cleared space in his closet for her clothes. They still navigated the complications of their different worlds. There were events Preston needed to attend where Wendy felt out of place. There were times when work took him away for days. But they made it work because they both wanted to. One Saturday in December, Preston showed up at Wendy's apartment early in the morning. Get dressed, he said. Wear warm clothes, we're going somewhere. Where? It's a surprise. They drove out of the city again, this time heading into the mountains. Snow had fallen overnight, turning the world white and pristine. Wendy watched the landscape change, curious and excited. Finally, they pulled up to a beautiful cabin tucked into the woods. What is this? Wendy asked. A place I own but never use, Preston said. I thought we could spend the weekend here. No phones, no work, no obligations, just us. The cabin was gorgeous inside, all wood and stone and huge windows overlooking the forest. A fire was already burning in the fireplace and the kitchen was stocked with food. How did you set this up? Wendy asked. I had help, Preston admitted, but I wanted to give us time away from everything, to just be together. They spent the weekend in a perfect bubble. They cooked meals together, Preston proving surprisingly competent in the kitchen. They hiked through the snowy woods and Wendy took dozens of photos. They played board games and read books and talked about everything. On Sunday evening, as they sat in front of the fire, Preston pulled her close. I've been thinking about something. What? Moving forward. With us. I know we've only been together a few months, but I've never been more sure of anything. I want a future with you, Wendy. Her heart stuttered. What kind of future? The kind where you're in my life permanently, where we figure out how to blend your world and mine. Where I come home to you every night. He paused. I'm not proposing, not yet, but I'm telling you my intentions. I want everything with you, and I want you to have time to think about what you want too. Wendy looked at him, at this man who'd been a stranger just a few months ago and was now the most important person in her life. I don't need time to think. I want that too. All of it. Preston kissed her, deep and slow, and the fire crackled beside them. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside they were warm and safe and together. The holidays passed in a blur of happiness. Wendy spent Christmas with Preston at his father's estate, which was decorated like something from a magazine. She gave Preston a photo album she'd made, filled with pictures from their time together. He gave her a new camera, top of the line, and admitted he'd asked her coworkers for advice on what she needed. "This is too much," she protested. "It's for capturing the moments that matter," he said. "And you matter most of all." New Year's Eve, they attended a charity gala together. Wendy wore a gorgeous dress Preston had helped her pick out, and for once she felt like she belonged in his world. They danced at midnight, kissing as fireworks exploded outside, and Wendy thought about how much had changed since the auction. "What are you thinking about?" Preston asked, holding her close. "How I accidentally bid on you and changed my entire life." "Best accident ever," he said, and she laughed because it was absolutely true. January brought a new challenge. Wendy's boss called her into his office with exciting news. "We've been granted funding for a major project documenting polar bears in the Arctic. It's a 6-week assignment, very prestigious, and we want you to lead it." Wendy's first reaction was pure excitement. This was the kind of opportunity she'd dreamed about. Her second reaction was dread, thinking about leaving Preston for 6 weeks. She told him that evening over dinner at his apartment. "It's an incredible opportunity, but it's 6 weeks in the Arctic. We'd have limited communication, harsh conditions. I'd be completely out of touch most of the time." Preston was quiet, processing. "When would you leave?" "Early February. I'd be back in March." More silence. Wendy watched his face, trying to read his thoughts. Finally, he looked at her. "You have to go," he said. "I don't have to." "Yes, you do. This is your dream, Wendy. This is the work you love. I'm not going to be the person who holds you back from that." "But 6 weeks, we'll figure it out," Preston said firmly. "We've figured out everything else. 6 weeks is nothing compared to the rest of our lives." She kissed him, grateful and relieved. "I love you. I love you too. Now tell me everything about polar bears." The weeks before her departure passed too quickly. Preston helped her prepare, making sure she had the best cold weather gear money could buy. He threw her a going-away party with her friends and co-workers. The night before she left, they stayed up late just holding each other. 6 weeks, Wendy said. "That's going to be the longest 6 weeks of my life." "Mine too," Preston agreed. "But you're going to do incredible work. You're going to capture something amazing, and I'll be here when you get back." The Arctic was exactly as harsh and beautiful as Wendy had imagined. The work was grueling, the conditions brutal, but the polar bears were magnificent. She photographed them hunting, playing, caring for cubs. Every shot felt important, meaningful. Communication was limited to brief satellite phone calls every few days. Hearing Preston's voice was both wonderful and painful, making her miss him more. But he always sounded proud of her, encouraging her, telling her about what was happening back home. "Your wolf photo won an award," he told her during one call. "The Conservation Fund is using it for their major campaign." "That's amazing," Wendy said, trying not to cry from homesickness and happiness. "You're amazing. I miss you." "I miss you too, so much." The 6 weeks felt eternal, but finally her work was done. Wendy flew back exhausted, frozen to her bones and deliriously happy to be heading home. Preston had texted that he'd pick her up from the airport himself. When she walked into Arrivals, she saw him immediately. He was wearing jeans and a heavy coat, looking decidedly un-billionaire-like, and the smile on his face made her heart soar. She dropped her bags and ran to him, and he caught her, lifting her off her feet. "You're back," he said into her hair. "You're actually back." "I'm back," she confirmed, holding him tight. "I'm home." They went to his apartment, which he'd apparently had cleaned and stocked with all her favorite things. Wendy showered off weeks of Arctic grime and changed into comfortable clothes, and when she came out, Preston had ordered Thai food and queued up a nature documentary. "I thought you might be sick of nature," he said. "Never," Wendy replied, curling up beside him on the couch. "But I am sick of being away from you." They spent the next few days barely leaving the apartment. Wendy caught up on sleep and showed Preston all her photos. He listened to every story, asked questions, made her feel like her work mattered. "I'm proud of you," he said one evening. "You're making a real difference." "So are you," Wendy pointed out. "Your foundation has donated millions to conservation efforts." "That's just money. You're doing the actual work." "Money matters too," she said. "We're a team, your resources and my passion. Together we're making an impact." Preston pulled her close. "I like the sound of that. Team." Spring arrived, bringing warmer weather and new opportunities. Wendy's Arctic photos were featured in a major magazine spread. Preston's latest business acquisition made headlines. They settled into a comfortable rhythm, balancing their different careers and lives. One April evening, Preston asked Wendy to dress up for dinner. She assumed they were going to another event or fancy restaurant. Instead, he drove them to the Wolf Rehabilitation Center where they'd had their second date. "What are we doing here?" she asked. "I wanted to bring you somewhere that matters to us," Preston said. He led her to a spot overlooking the wolf enclosure where a blanket and picnic basket were set up. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors. They sat down and Wendy leaned against him, watching the wolves move in their enclosure. "This is perfect." "Wendy," Preston said, and something in his voice made her turn to look at him. He was holding a small box. "These past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You've taught me what it means to actually live, not just exist. You've shown me that love is about being seen and accepted for who you really are." He opened the box, revealing a beautiful ring. Simple but elegant, exactly her style. "I told you before that I wanted a future with you. I still do. I want every future with you. Will you marry me?" Wendy's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, absolutely yes." Preston slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her as the sun set behind them and the wolves howled in the distance. It was perfect and meaningful and so completely them. The engagement made news, of course. But this time, Wendy was ready for it. She'd learned to handle the attention, to protect what mattered while letting the rest slide away. What mattered was Preston and the life they were building together. They got married in September, a year after the auction that had brought them together. The ceremony was at the Wolf Center, intimate and beautiful, with only their closest friends and family. Lisa was her maid of honor, crying through the entire ceremony. Preston's father gave a toast about how Wendy had transformed his son into someone